Okay, so hi everyone and welcome to UX Insiders. For anyone who is attending for the first time, my name is Rachel and I'm a researcher here at the UX Design Institute. So some of you will already know UX Insiders is a series of live events that we host here at the UX Design Institute, and each event we are joined by some of the most interesting and creative people in the field of UX. And we do this just to give some insight into what it's actually like to work in the UX industry right now. So today we're really lucky to be joined by Sophia and Shifra, who are working at the moment at IBM. So Sophia is a UX designer on process mining, a product within IBM automation. And Shifra is a UX researcher for AI ops, which is also within IBM automation. So today they are going to talk us through how product researchers and designers can harness the power of AI in an ethical way. So this will be a really, really interesting talk and really topical right now as well. So just before we start the event, I'll just briefly explain to everybody how you can interact with us during the webinar. So if you want to just simply join the chat, introduce yourself, say hello, you can use the chat box. But if you have a specific question for our speakers, please make sure to pop that in the questions box. We'll look in the questions box for questions as we go through, and towards the end, we'll have a Q&A. And if you see a question that you're particularly interested in hearing the answer to, please make sure to upvote it so that we know it's one that others are looking to hear about, and we'll make sure to ask that question. I also just want to make a quick announcement before we start, something we're really excited about, and given tonight's topic around AI, we think you guys will want to hear about too, which is that we are running a workshop towards the end of June, so the 28th of June. This workshop is called Better UX Design with AI. So we are running it in collaboration with Nick Babbage. Nick is an AI expert and a principal UX designer at Brain Technologies. And this workshop is really exciting because it is a hands-on practical workshop. So you'll get to try out using different tools within the UX design process and to learn how you can use UX and AI together to work faster and better as well. And for everybody who is attending the webinar tonight, we're really happy to be able to offer a discount. So we're offering a €100 discount for anybody who's attending the webinar. So you can just use the code webinar100 when you register, and that will give you €100 off. So it'll be €200 instead of €300. So we're going to share a link to register to the workshop in the chat box now for anybody who would be interested in doing that. Okay, so now I'd like to formally introduce our guests. You're both very welcome to UX Insiders, and we're really, really glad to have you this evening. I know you have a presentation prepared for us, so I'll hand over to you whenever you're ready.
Very much. Thanks, Rachel. I'll just go ahead and share. Fingers crossed. Okay, hopefully you can see that okay. Rachel, you can let me know if there's any problems.
No, it's perfect. Nice and clear.
Brilliant. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. So Sophia and I will basically be having a little bit of a chat around our roles in IBM and how we design for products within IBM automation. Basically, we'll cover, I suppose, how principles of design thinking and trustworthy AI can be leveraged just to build more considered products within IBM. Just a quick overview of the session. Sophia and I will introduce the roles and give you a bit of an overview about what it is that we do day to day. We'll talk about how we might consider design whenever we're building these products. We'll talk about the process that we use in IBM, which is enterprise design thinking, and then kind of raise this question whether AI is always a solution or not. We'll touch on some of the fundamental properties of trustworthy AI as well. And towards the end of the session, we'll be sure to open the floor for any questions and open a bit of a discussion as well. So just a little bit on me, first of all. My name is Shifra Baker, and I'm a user researcher within IBM Automation. I work within the AI ops portfolio at the moment, so essentially working on products that help IT operations within organizations. I don't technically come from a UX background. I have a master's in design innovation, and I suppose all of my design knowledge has come from that master's. My background before that was actually in music technology, so I'm a bit of a mixed bag, but I'm working as a UX researcher at the moment anyway. So Sophie and I put together this kind of UX pipeline, as we call it, the 3 different stages of different UX roles within IBM. Because we're such a big organization, I suppose our roles are quite segmented. So I'm a UX researcher, and the research that I do kind of leverages insights so that Sophia can take those insights and ideate wireframes and solutions then for our users. And then we pass that on typically to a visual designer. I suppose a bit of my day-to-day, some of the typical techniques or practices that I would use. You can often find me conducting user interviews or concept testing, things like usability testing. A couple more ad hoc responsibilities that I'd have would be conducting design thinking workshops, sessions as well with the team. So it really just depends day to day. In terms of tools, I suppose for UX researcher, they're fairly straightforward. We use a lot of WebEx, which is pretty much like Zoom or Teams or something like that. And also Miro is very handy for affinity diagramming and things like that. We use UserZoom, which is, I suppose, more of a focused UX research tool. We conduct like unmoderated tests and things like that on that. So things like card sorts or tree tests and so on. We also use tools like Mixpanel and Amplitude just for analytics, just to analyze them as a quantitative means. But I'll pass over to Sophia now to introduce herself.
Nice, thank you. Can you hear me at all?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, well, my name is Sophia. I'm the UX designer on IBM Process Mining, which is a business analyst tool. Shifa was previously on process mining before moving over to AI Ops, which happened like a couple of weeks ago. So we have been working together about maybe a year and a half. So yeah, I am actually Norwegian Argentinian. I'm not from here. And my background is in something called creative computing. So I did my degree in London. It was a very small cohort, and it was at the center of it was design thinking, and it kind of spanned over to design engineering and computing as well. But the core of it was kind of design thinking and product and production. And in this pipeline that we kind of created, I am bang in the middle. I am the UX designer, which means that I have to take Shifa's insights and findings and translate them into a flow or an experience or something that can be used. So in my day-to-day, I do a lot of wireframing. That's basically mainly what I would say my days consist of is this kind of creation of screens and that are part of a flow. And that can be in any way. That can be in sketching or whatever it may be. But I continuously kind of have this conversation between research and between visuals, between PMs and devs to kind of make sure that what the restrictions are, the technicalities, and just to make sure that the skeleton of what gets given to visual is correct and appropriate and can just kind of go off to be made. And in terms of tools that I used to be in Sketch and XD, and then you put my screens together and put them in Vision, and then I'd present them to whoever. But Figma is actually taken completely over and does everything in one place. So we've got, if not, I think at least automation wide, correct me if I'm wrong, Shifra, if not company wide, I think we've all kind of gone to stick to Figma. So yeah, that's just kind of a little bit about me and my day to day. And I suppose the point of today is to kind of ask a little bit of the question around AI, which is a huge word at the moment. It's kind of popping up everywhere. Trying to plant the seed a little bit inside the designer brain of whether, yes, I'm being told to put AI in my product, I'm being told to put AI in my company, but why? And is there a reason to that? Can I justify it? And most importantly, is it considered? Is it thought through? So yeah, Shifa, if you want to take it.
Yeah, sure. As Sophia said, it is such a buzzword at the moment. So when we talk about humanizing technology, I suppose we talk about putting the user at the forefront of design. So at the end of the day, we're designing for people and we don't design for systems. So it'd be really wrong of us to dismiss the user altogether and just focus on AI functionality and implement it for the sake of implementation. So I suppose what will keep me up at night is if we were implementing AI just for the sake of it, with no real value to a user. So how do we go about this? I think the thing that me and Sophia both share, like in our discussions about design just day to day, is about how important empathy is, to put yourself in the shoes of the user, and essentially walk a mile in their shoes, understand their unmet needs, and understand their point of view and what it is for them to interact with the products. They're the users of our products and we aren't, so we really have to learn from their own lived experiences and their own how they engage with the product. Another really important factor of this is building trust. Particularly around the topic of AI, there's a lot of hesitancy, and I suppose a bit of resistance as well sometimes towards AI. That's often due to a lack of understanding about the capabilities and I suppose the whole ambiguity around the topic. But building trust with our customers and this is the products that we put out there is really essential. And most importantly, we want to avoid starting with the solution. So the last thing that we would want to do as designers is to reverse engineer something like this and just implement it there for the sake of it. So how do we go about designing products in IBM? I'll just touch on briefly the process that we use in IBM for design thinking. So it's called the loop process. And essentially, if you're familiar with design thinking at all, there's several variations of this process, whether you use the double diamond or the Stanford D School model. IBM essentially have their own one called the loop. It's by no means an iterative process, but it maneuvers through these 3 stages of observe, reflect, and make. As a UX researcher, I predominantly stay kind of more so in the observe stage. This is where we go out into the field and understand the needs of our users, try and understand their pain points and also the gain points that they have with their products, and really just try and listen and learn from them. At the reflect stage, we essentially reframe our problems. So basically, we begin with loads of assumptions about what the problem is for our users. And at the reflect, this is where we take a step back and understand, are we actually solving the right problem? And once we're kind of confident in that we are, we move on towards the make stage, and this is where Sophia's role will come into it. This is where we begin kind of ideating solutions and begin prototyping and things like that. As I said, it's not linear at all, so we do often have to go back to different stages. As design is such an iterative process, we often find ourselves back and forward plenty of times. I'm sure you'll all know this quote, but if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. That quote from Albert Einstein, I think as a user researcher in particular, really resonates with me because I do spend so much time in the problem space, and it's really worthwhile understanding that problem to the fullest extent to make sure that you are kind of solving the right problem first before you can begin solving that problem in the right way.
So is AI the solution? I think that kind of goes, we're kind of taking it back to the original question, which is, I think Shifa said it really well when she said avoid starting with the solution. And I think as AI is kind of growing and the interest around it is kind of growing, we're kind of more and more designers are being told by their PMs or the bosses or whoever to just make sure that there's some piece of AI in this and just let's use AI for this and let's just put AI in that. And I think there's a really important aspect because AI isn't just anything, it's an artificial piece of intelligence. So we need to have some sort of approach to it, which is aware of whatever risk we might be going about it. And so just shoving it in there for the sake of shoving it in there isn't a very, what we would say, kind of ethical approach to it because the implications we might not know about. So in IBM, we're gonna, what the point of today is to kind of walk you a little bit through how we kind of structure this ethical thinking in the same way that we are, I suppose, structuring creativity when we create the loop. We also have to create structures for how we're going to company-wide, on a company-wide basis approach creating something that is an ethical approach to implementation of AI in our products. So in IBM in particular, we have principles, pillars, and regulations. And starting on principles that they basically lay the foundation, that they question the initial question. So before we even start a project, we have to make sure that it is augmenting and not replacing human intelligence. That's a really big part of it. The data and the insights have to belong to the creator. And then technology must be transparent and it must be completely explainable. And that just kind of, before we can even get into the project, that has to be the foundation of the reasoning for why we would even think about, okay, let's put AI into this. Let's use some sort of AI. And then we have our pillars, which is they support the entire process and they kind of live in the iterative nature of the design thinking process, which is where Shifa and I are. So we're actually going to spend a little bit more time after this slide going into what each one of the pillars kind of mean. And then there's regulation, which are internal and external. It's governments and essentially, which is an ethics board. It has to go through a process of approval, kind of a bigger, there's papers and there's pens involved. Governmental, national, and international regulations. So if you live in the EU, you have to have a certain approach to AI. That might not be the same as if you live in the US or if you live in Australia or China or wherever it may be. But we're going to dive a little bit further into the pillars because, like I said, those are kind of part of the design process. So we go through the loop, and we go through the research, and we go through the making, and we go through the prototyping and the checking, and checking that we are still answering the right question. And this is very much an extra loop inside the loop, because we have to be a little bit careful when we are talking about something that is artificial intelligence. So we have to add these kind of extra stops to make sure that we're not threading on kind of dangerous waters, and not doing something that we're not 100% certain and confident of. And so we've got explainability, fairness, robustness, transparency, and privacy. And explainability basically means that people are completely entitled to understand how the AI arrived at the conclusion, and that needs to be a simple and straightforward explanation. It needs to be easy for a person to explain to another person how kind of the algorithm has gotten to where the solution that it's kind of spot out. It can't be a sake of not knowing how it got there. And then we've got fairness, which is interesting, because we have to make sure that the AI model is fair to everybody, in particular to historically underrepresented groups. So what do we mean by that? For example, if we are, by training an AI, we feed it data, and that data needs to be fair. So for example, if I'm working on some sort of medical app of some sort, the medical data that we have on men is much more than the medical data that we have compiled in women in general. So that bias needs to be balanced out, and that bias needs to be fair across everybody. Yeah, I think Shifa is taking over from these ones.
Yeah, whenever we consider robustness, I suppose this is where designers can sort of share the responsibility with the likes of engineers, because robustness will count for how resilient the AI functionality is whenever it's built, how easily can it withstand any abnormalities that it might come into contact with. So I suppose we consider how effectively this might handle exceptional circumstances. So it has to be built fairly robust in order for it to not cause any harm. Whenever we consider transparency, I suppose this typically goes hand in hand with trust and explainability as well. This is how we disclose information to our users or to other stakeholders. Basically try and, I suppose, be transparent in how we kind of communicate how the AI model has been trained, how it's been developed, how it's been designed, and how it's going to be used, and the value it might offer them. I think a lot of the time users won't actually read this, or they won't kind of understand it fully, maybe to depending on their extent of or knowledge of AI. However, once we provide it, I suppose that passes the responsibility on to the end user, whether they want to interpret it or not. But being transparent and possible in that information is essential. And then finally, when we consider privacy, privacy also kind of means about providing full disclosure about what data is going to be collected, but also how it's going to be stored. I suppose the period of time that it'll be stored for as well is also important to consider, and who will have access to it. Everyone has the right to privacy and to how their data is handled and everything. So we have to make sure that we're in accordance to either international guidelines or to national guidelines as well, whenever we consider that. And also on an organization level, we have a huge responsibility of looking after people's data and kind of honouring that privacy.
And so failing fast and failing often. Say that we have our solution, we've kind of thought of it, we've ideated it, we've gone through every single one of the pillars. And that doesn't mean that we are ready to go and I can create some wireframes and give it off to the visual to kind of go and get developed. Like I mentioned before we started talking about the pillars, the kind of the regulations around AI are additional to the design thinking process. So yes, you might have gone through all of the pillars, you might have ticked all the boxes, great, but you still have to go through the process of creating and then testing and then creating and then testing and then creating and testing, really checking if the solution or the answer that you have is something that covers a real human need, which is kind of the core of design thinking. So failing fast and failing often just means that accepting, being unmarried to your ideas and accepting that wherever you are with it doesn't mean that it's free to kind of go, but going back through the loop again and researching and maybe accepting that the second time around you won't cross off all of the pillars and you actually have to stop yourself and rethink the question from the beginning, and even if there is a question there to begin with. So yeah, I suppose that is kind of the core around thinking, having an ethical approach to AI, accepting that structure, working with that structure, regardless if you're in IBM or wherever you may be. And yeah, Shifa, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. I think the design process in general is often quite a complex process whenever you maneuver through it. And then just when we embed these principles of, I suppose, aiming for trustworthy AI and things like that, it just kind of complicates it a bit more, but still really valuable to kind of consider those throughout the process. I think a lot of the times as well, the projects that we work on, they often go legs and they often go through several rounds of iterations, even like through critiques and things like that as well. And obviously through user testing, and they often transform themselves from when we first began. So just, yeah, exactly, working through that process and maneuvering through it, whilst also considering these pillars and principles throughout, is just really essential for us whenever we're building these products. But that's pretty much it. Thanks for listening, and yeah, we're pretty much finished up, but we'll welcome any questions that you might have.
Perfect. Thank you guys for that. It was really, really interesting and so much to consider when we think about AI. And I know you kind of touched on the hype around it, and it can just be thrown into lots of things at the moment. So I think that was really important to highlight. I have a question here that I think is a good place to start to kind of set the scene. But we have somebody who's wondering if you could explain kind of the biggest differences between a UX researcher versus a UX designer.
Yeah, go for it.
I was gonna say you can kick it off.
I'm sorry.
No, not at all. Yeah, I suppose I think I was actually a little bit blind to that before I joined IBM and how segmented the roles would be. I suppose the UX researcher takes on all the responsibilities that would engage with the users. So doing the user research, things like user interviews, any exploratory research, discovery research, and things like that, in order to generate those insights that we then use to basically as points of ideation. Once we get to the ideation stage and actually come up with the solutions, I'd then pass over to Sophia, who would kind of begin the wireframing process and actually building out these potential solutions. She'd then pass it back to me, where I begin to test them with the users. So a lot of the engagement that I would have is with our customers or users. And Sophia would also actually be there though as well, and listening in to those insights. And she would take those insights and basically work with them to develop the solutions.
It has a lot to do maybe with the size of the company that you're working for as well, because often IBM is a massive company, so we kind of have the privilege, if you will, to kind of have these kind of segmented roles. But often if you're working for a smaller company, those roles will very easily bleed into each other. Like Shifa said, I often sit in on a lot. It also depends on what type of designer you wish to be. So I like to sit in on Shifa's kind of interview sessions. I'll have my camera off and I'll just be listening. So I'll have some sort of foundation and understanding when I actually go in and make my flows and my decisions that are more holistic and more have more context. In the same way that my role, I have a lot of very active conversation with my visual designer. She'll look at my lo-fi designs. She'll watch me present them back to PM. So, the main, I think the main difference is what Shifa said, that she's more actually facing the users, but sometimes I'll see them, and then sometimes I'll have a very active conversation with Shifa, what she thinks of my designs, and maybe she's interpreted it differently. But
yeah, I think all the roles are fairly fluid, even though they are segmented. Like Sophia will dip into my role, and I think it's really useful for Sophia to have those skills. And likewise, like I think it helps to know a lot about the UX process, and sometimes I shouldn't, but might stick my nose in where it's not wanted. And similar with the visual designer as well, they'd have visibility of both of those kind of earlier stages. Within IBM as well, there are a small segment of product designers, so they undertake the user research, the UX design, and the visual design together. So they kind of would use all three roles basically. So it really just depends, as Sophia said, on the size of the org as well.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think that definitely answers the question, and hopefully that's clear. So I have another question here, which is, how do you prototype AI-based systems, and how do you evaluate them in a user-centered way?
Well, I think when it comes to most prototyping is kind of it's quite similar, I think. When it comes to the questions that you're able to present, when they're kind of the spending time in the problem, I suppose that's kind of where you would be testing. But also you do have a development team available, so they would kind of be part of the AI. Also, when we're talking, this creating a product can be spanned over years. So when we're talking this iteration, this is a long process. So we would have somebody like IBM would have resources available to kind of be able to create that in some sort of smaller scale and then test it and then maybe create on a bigger scale. Yeah, that's how I would see that. And off either with or without kind of some sort of wireframe, depending on who you're kind of showing it to and what scope you're kind of showing it to.
Yeah, I think it depends massively on the fidelity, because Sophia and I worked on a project there recently where we were essentially testing an AI solution, but with a storyboard concept card on it. And it was basically like just like a cartoon that we were trying to translate the concept to users with. So it just depends on the maturity stage of where the product's at. But you can test at several different stages with different levels of fidelity. I don't think it's massively different to testing any other product or doing user testing for another solution, because you do it so many different times. But as Sophia mentioned, whenever you do get to that slightly mature stage and you involve like UX engineers or something, then yeah, you can have much stronger kind of higher fidelity prototypes to test on.
Okay, great. So we have a question here just on, what do you see as kind of the biggest opportunity, I guess, for UX research and using AI? And do you have any kind of best practices that you can share on that?
Well, that's a great question. I suppose opportunity for UX research, I think a lot of the time in the past for different products and stuff, it's been ignored, where people have just kind of jumped to solutioning and things like that. And I suppose products really haven't offered the value that they could have potentially offered for customers, without actually putting down that groundwork and exploring user needs and things like that. So I think that's definitely where the biggest opportunity is. When we consider things around the topic of AI, a lot of the questions I'd be talking to customers about or users with is even around their behaviors and their attitude towards AI in general, and the different tools that they currently use. And I suppose trying to understand that hesitancy and resistance really towards AI, because I think that's a really important element to consider whenever we are designing solutions, to kind of consider those, I suppose, reasons for hesitancy that we might be able to kind of smooth over for the user.
Yeah. Okay, great. And another person here is just asking, would you have any recommendations for resources or courses where you can learn a bit more on this topic of AI and UX to kind of help prepare you for applying for UX roles in this kind of niche area, I guess?
Yeah, offers a number of different courses. I know I'm joking. IBM actually have some training that's offered to the public as well. I can try and put together a list and share it with Rachel and Cara, maybe to forward on. But there's so many courses out there at the moment, even like sites like Coursera and stuff, you'll find endless hours of training. But Sophia and I actually use a lot of our time in IBM just kind of upskilling on different courses that we have generally. Which is really good because you can branch into so many different topics. They're not necessarily always UX specific, but just in general in that space, there's loads of courses available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect. I might ask our student success team as well, just to reshare the link to our workshop, our short course kind of workshop. Yeah. It's AI for UX specifically, so we have that coming up towards the end of the month as well.
I would actually say on that, I think you'll get so much more value out of doing a workshop like that, because it is like applied and tangible. You'll get so much out of doing something like that. I know even when Sophia and I work closely together, a lot of our learning would actually come whenever we're in the room together, actually workshopping ideas and things like that. So
if you have the opportunity to join a workshop, I absolutely would. I think a lot of creativity kind of comes out of those. It's micro interactions.
Yeah, it's one thing reading about the different stages of the process. Yeah. You can get into a room and actually, or whether it's virtually or not, actually practice it yourself. I think there's huge value in that.
Yeah, and I don't know about you guys, but there is a lot of kind of things being offered at the moment, but they're not that kind of hands-on practical aspect. You don't get to actually learn by doing, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think that's kind of the advantage as well there. Okay, great. So we have a question here just on the process that you showed as part of your presentation, and somebody just wondering, how do you define the visual design? What is involved in that third part of the process?
So I work really closely with my visual designer, and a visual designer essentially works with the design system, which means that within a company or within a product, you'll have a set design system, which ensures that everybody's using the same hex code, for example, for the error messages, or that headings are the correct size. And so there's kind of a system to everything. and our visual designer I have some sort of understanding of that design system. I don't work in it, but I know all the components that are available. And so when I get to the stage of fidelity where I'm kind of making screens which are using those components, and I'll place them somewhat where they should be. Just the point of the flow needs to be understood. And then I'll kind of work in some sort of mid-fi level with my visual designer, who is essentially some sort of graphic designer and has a really good understanding of shape and color, and takes the grayscale screens that I have and translate it using the components that belong to the design system of the product. So sometimes she interprets what I say and gives me suggestions to maybe use a data table here instead, or use a radio button here instead, and that's kind of like an ongoing conversation, again, in the iterative nature of design. But my visual designer is that's kind of her job, is to have very much the visual eye and a very good understanding of design system, in order to kind of, again, the way that I've translated Shifa's insights into some sort of experience, she must translate my experience into something that is consistent with the rest of the products, consistent with the portfolio, looks the way that the rest of the product does, and just visually is correct, based on my flow and my experience that I've made.
Yeah. Great. I think we also in our UX design courses, we like to describe it almost like the UX designer is like the architect, I guess, and the visual designer is like the interior designer, and as you say, has that
nice.
eye and the visual elements. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's correct. It's all, we call it informational architecture. So it's getting informed of how to do things visually. And then she just translates that and puts some colors on it, makes it nice.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, some confusion around it sometimes occurs because it can be called visual designer or sometimes UI designer as well.
Yeah, and often, again, given the size of the company, those two might bleed into each other. So you might very well be a UX UI designer, or you might just be a UI designer. I'm talking, again, in the context of IBM, which is a massive company where people get to be only one thing. But for example, we work in the office with one girl in that isn't an automation station in security, and she very much does her own UI design. So she kind of goes through the whole process on her own. They might bleed into each other a little bit, but I can understand the confusion.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So a question here, in your own roles in IBM, are you guys currently using external AI tools to help kind of speed up your day-to-day UX tasks, or have you found that they're not that useful yet for your current responsibilities?
So we wouldn't use things like ChatGPT or anything like that specifically. I don't use it anyway, just for loads of different reasons. But there's a lot of AI embedded in a lot of the tools that we would use day to day, even things like Slack and the automations and Slack bot and things like that exist in there. I think they're kind of like nearly like incremental bits of AI that we use typically day to day without even noticing. But yeah, there's a couple of tools I use that have elements of that in it, like Airtable as well. Again, they're just small functionalities within the tools. But yeah, they're kind of hidden. You wouldn't even notice that or recognize it necessarily as AI as such, but they're there nonetheless.
Yeah, I think the closest you'll get is maybe to try and like generate some sort of dummy text. That's kind of like, I also don't think, I've seen kind of maybe Figma might be incorporating some sort of bits and bobs for pictures or text, or that you could maybe, if you had fields of that you had to fill with names, you could just write name and it would fill all your fields with names. But I myself haven't fully gotten into the I'm going to start using kind of AI to do that as of yet. But I know people that kind of use to get some dummy text, to get some headings, or to get some better fill that would translate the storyline better than just lorem ipsum.
Yeah, I guess a question I have just on the back of that is, I know that, we are starting to see some kind of stricter regulations coming into place and almost like a slowing down of how we interact with AI. Is that a factor in IBM? Is that part of why maybe you're not using it like ChatGPT or something at the moment, or is it more just personal preference, or what's your experience of the approach to that within IBM?
Yeah, for me at the moment, I know it is more down to privacy concerns. We often have a set of tools that we typically would use, and like, I mean, once they're approved and everything, there's a lot of regulations within an organization that size. So I typically stick to the rules in that sense. Also, you don't know what access, because of the lack of transparency around some of the tools. You don't know what access you're typically granting, especially when I would engage with a lot of like sensitive data or PII and things like that, and I would never want to compromise any of that. So the tools I would use are specifically ones that have been approved. And as Sophia mentioned in the presentation there, whenever it comes to tools like that, we do have quite a rigorous, I suppose, process of approval for just tools and AI in general. Things usually have to go through the ethics board and things like that, just to make sure we're not compromising any data like that. So yeah, I typically stick to the ones I know that are okay. IBM do have a lot of tools though internally that we can use. Like
yeah, I was going to say
things like that. They're basically tools that IBM have that we can use and everything. So they are available anyway. But for those external tools, I suppose just be a little more careful.
Yeah, I would say that.
And those kind of tools that you do have approved or that are kind of there for you to use, do you have any examples of, we've a couple of questions coming through just around, examples of using AI in your work, which I think you have kind of answered, but I guess just, are there examples of ones that you have been using a little bit?
I actually haven't. I don't think I have. I think there's kind of like this overall understanding of everything that Shiva was just talking about in terms of the privacy and the risk around it. Unless because IBM have their own kind of AI and have their own kind of like product and I think there's a very kind of general understanding of the risk within that, and unless there's a full kind of approval of things, even out of personal notice, I probably wouldn't go in and put in and ask for things that on a product that I work on that isn't released yet. There's a massive amount of risk associated to that. So I don't think that's something that I would be treading on anytime soon.
Yeah, I think any use of the tools, whenever, say within Photoshop, like Photoshop is a tool that we can use and everything, and is the generative autofill of images that you can use there. I've seen loads of images go around in Slack channels, but they're kind of more just for fun, because when Sophia mentioned that we have our own design language within IBM called Carbon. So typically everything that we use, any icons or imagery and stuff like that, it has to be in accordance to brand guidelines anyway. So there's not really often a lot of space to kind of put in a picture of a hill that you've put in a dragon in into things like that. So they're often used for fun, but in terms of products that are going out the door and things like that, there wouldn't be as much use for it. But that's, I suppose, in the more common sense of AI as we see it now, as in like generating text or blogs through GPT and images like that. There's not necessarily a use for us at the moment for things like that, but in more incremental ways, I think there has been really worthwhile uses of AI within the org.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so I'd love to know then, we often have people attend our webinars who are thinking about making a career switch into UX, or kind of maybe, thinking about it, not 100% sure. What advice would you have for somebody like that? What is it that you love about working within UX, and what would you say to somebody who's kind of a little bit on the fence right now?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because Shiv and I have very different backgrounds, because I studied computing and I studied design, and that was kind of like the plan from the beginning, was that I kind of was going to go down this path, and Shiva kind of switched it. So we'll have different perspectives on it, which I guess will be nice. I'd say the thing about UX is that it's not just UX, it's design in general, and it's understanding experience, and it's understanding and empathizing and preempting human emotions. So it is a really beautiful field, and it doesn't only apply to making screens on a screen. It's much vaster than that. So I think it's, for me, it was always really interesting to kind of go down the computing path with something that had a very human aspect to it. Even when I was in my coding classes, I was like way more interested in the UI and the interface than I was in the actual coding. So I think that really beautiful human aspect and understanding and having some sort of responsibility of translating something complex and computational into to a regular user. I think that's a really, that's kind of what drew me into that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I came from a slightly different background, so I was kind of just more broader general design, which I had an interest in. Like I was really keen into design thinking and things like that. And I suppose I always had an interest in technology, and I just wanted to gain a bit of experience within that sector of actually designing, like for user experience basically, and for digital products, especially because it has such a large. I suppose when you consider design as a market in general, a large portion of it is related to UX. I probably wasn't as confident in my abilities within UX before kind of making the switch. But I was probably more so confident in my design abilities and knowing the design process and how to go about problem solving in a creative way. And I think if you are anyway hesitant towards making that leap, I think if you kind of have some experience or knowledge of the design process, you can literally apply that to any industry. So I think the transition isn't actually as difficult as you might think. You probably just have to back your own abilities in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, great. I think that's really great advice. So thank you for that. And I guess, thinking about the interview process for IBM, and you both, are clearly working in very interesting roles. I'm sure it was a competitive process. How did you make yourself and your portfolio stand out? And I guess, how did you land the job, really?
Yeah, we were actually talking about this earlier on. It's such a funny way how it came about because we both went through the interview process, but our portfolios were essentially used as a prompt during interviews. But neither Sophie and I had really many UX examples within our portfolio. So my portfolio was largely based around process and kind of my approach to problem solving, which I think did stand out in a sense. I also had experience in conducting design thinking workshops and things like that, and IBM had quite a strong stance on design thinking. So I think that also helped. But just the general overview of your approach and your process and I suppose your line of thinking, I think if someone can see that and understand it, then it can be really valuable. Because I suppose you'll be able to translate that then to any situation or project that you're given once you're in the role.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, my headphones died there, so I hope you can still hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Shiva said, so I got hired like 3 months after graduation, so my portfolio wasn't filled with kind of UX and wireframes, and I had, I think, one project, but I had a project that I was really proud of, and when I went into the interview, I spoke very holistically about it, and it was a lot about the thinking behind it and the kind of the understanding of the person, understanding of the problem. And so what I presented on my interview didn't even have, I don't think it even had screens. So regardless of what it is that you're kind of I think it's important to understand that what they're looking for is to see how you think, um, how you approach really a problem, um, and that goes a lot into who you are as a person and an individual, and regardless of what background you have, in some way that's going to complement how you approach the problem. So I think it was not so much standing out, but being very confidently that individual, having very confidently that whatever piece of information or piece of kind of background that you have, and implementing that in some way, because essentially what you're going to learn when you get hired, you're going to learn regardless, and you're going to learn Figma, and you're going to learn all these kind of things, but how you think and how you approach the problem is really what they're looking for, the uniqueness, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And one more point to that, actually, because we were chatting about this earlier on as well, because I don't really come from a massively technical background, the technical knowledge and things like that you can learn on the job, but I think what was more important, especially considering UX design or even UX research, is how you understand people and how you empathize with people. That is much more difficult to learn on the job. So if you have those, they're really strong skills and characteristics to have. All the technical knowledge will soon follow, I think, after that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great advice. Thank you for that. So there's a question here just around bias and how that can be challenging. So this person is wondering, how do you identify bias? And their point is sometimes it's not until implementation that you can see the impact of bias and that it becomes apparent. So how do you catch it earlier in the process?
Yeah, I think from the beginning you have to assume that you're going to have multiple biases. Like we all have hundreds of biases that we begin with. I think the way to mitigate them and trying to minimize them as much as possible is going through several rounds of different design critiques with more diverse teams. We can do them across the organization, but also externally whenever we go through multiple rounds of testing, just putting things in front of users and getting that feedback. Going through multiple rounds of iteration always helps. But we also do a lot of training actually within IBM, which kind of makes us aware of what those biases are, and how to understand them and recognize them as well, which also helps. But yeah, I think assume from the outset that you're going to have them, because we all do. It's just natural for us to have them. But yeah, working with diverse teams is a huge way to mitigate it, because everyone will have different perspectives, and humble you in a sense as well whenever you go off on a tangent. But yeah.
I think one of the main things for IBM as well, in terms of that bias, is having a really, Shiva touched on it, and it is the team being really diverse from the beginning, and there being different representations there, and having like a big pool of people that could potentially catch their own kind of some sort of bias, and I think that's a really really big part of it. If I'm not wrong, that's even like a mathematical model that the more diverse, the more type of people that you have within one crowd, the higher kind of like that collective intelligence is going to be, on the understanding and that bias. I think that's a really big part of it, having a really diverse team as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I think that, like you both said, kind of having that awareness is the first step, I guess, to accept that you will have biases, and
yeah,
that's part of it. Yeah. Okay, great. So I saw a question there from someone wondering, do you think AI could replace users? And I guess for user testing, but it also begs the question: do you think AI could replace UX designers or UX researchers in the future? And I'd love to know your opinion on that, or what the future holds for AI and where it fits in UX.
Yeah, we were talking about it earlier today, actually. That's a bit. It's funny. I think what we wanted to get through with this presentation and this conversation is that design has to be human centered, and it has to be empathetic, and it has to understand people, and that has to come from people. And the UX designer role, the UX researcher role, at its core, in order to translate a computer fair enough, needs to understand what a human needs to receive. It needs to understand the human need. And I think that is a role that can only be done by a human being. Yeah, I don't think in terms of like replacing users, again, talking about that bias, you need the diversity of real people. Yeah, Shifa, correct me if I'm wrong if you think any differently.
No, I agree 100%. I think a lot of the tools that are out there that might incorporate AI into them can definitely help designers probably augment their skill set and refine their skill set. But I don't think it could ever be a replacement, because at the end of the day, computers can't think conceptually like humans can. And when it comes to things like ideation, which is such a huge part of her role, like it's not just drawing gray squares that Sophia does, or it's not just running surveys in the background is what I do. Computers won't be able to think conceptually like we do as humans. So there'll never be a full replacement for that, I don't think, anyway. I don't think we're being naive in that stance either. I think there are a lot of benefits to tools that implement AI functionality and things like that can make our jobs a lot easier and perhaps less mundane in some elements, but I don't think it'll be a full replacement.
Also, tying it back to kind of like the point of the whole webinar, if anything, it is trying to have this ethical approach to AI in which artificial intelligence aids human intelligence instead of replacing it. And that's when we start talking about regulations, and we start talking about governmental regulations, and bigger than kind of us. Fair, we have companies like IBM that are doing it internally and are attempting not to kind of cross that line. That won't be everybody. And so for those regulations to be put in place at a wider scale, hopefully that's kind of a conversation that's going to start to happen, planting those seeds in designers' head, like we were saying earlier. That will hopefully be part of it. And so do we get to the point where hopefully we won't get to that point where that ever would be kind of a concern, because it would have been regulated from beforehand with the intention of aiding rather than replacing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice, and to focus on that. How can it be used to help us rather than worrying too much about it being a replacement? So a really interesting question has just come in that's caught my eye, which is this person is saying, as a much older person looking to switch, do you see diversity of age in your teams?
100%. Yeah, I think I couldn't tell you the range, but massively. Yeah. I mean, Sophie and I are of similar age, but we'd be the exception. I mean, there's literally within the studio. So we work in the studio in Dublin. There's literally all ages within that studio alone, and across different teams as well. There's loads of diversity in terms of experience as well. Like IBM operates in bands, so you'll have a range of people in different bands as well. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, also something that IBM does really interestingly really well is that people will jump from role to role within the company really easily in an attempt to kind of retain as many employees as possible. So I think there is a designer, a woman that's just become a designer down in our sister team in Hursley, who had been like in marketing, and she's been in sales, and she has like a 25-year career, and she's just become a UX designer, for the sense of kind of she wanted to make that same jump. And so if she can make it internally, then I'm sure that's something that can happen externally as well. Perhaps there's a bit more safety in kind of attempting internally, but I don't think there's any problem at all at starting at any age. Again, UX design is understanding people, and with whatever experience you have, you will have some sort of background to be able to do that. Whether it is directly with your users or having a better understanding of your product or whatever it is, it's a very, very kind of, you just need to be a very well-rounded person, and even if that is later in your career, I'm sure that will be the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we obviously our courses are geared towards people looking to switch career and move into UX, and we often see people coming to UX after a full career in something else.
Yeah.
And of all different types of ages. And I guess without sounding too cliche, it's never too late to make that switch. That's what we find, that actually people just bring an amazing difference in their skill set and in their experience. So I would certainly encourage anyone thinking to not be not worry about that being a barrier.
Yeah.
We have another question here just from somebody who has a background in sociology and interest in psychology, working in graphic design.
Nice.
Sounds like a perfect combination to me, but they're just wondering, would they need to go back and study an additional degree to be able to get into UX?
I think no, but when it comes to applying to jobs, perhaps you're going to have to compensate with some sort of portfolio. And probably you won't necessarily have to do a whole degree. There's a lot of people working in UX that don't have degrees in UX. A lot of my managers are full-on software engineers that kind of made the jump. I don't think you need a degree, maybe some sort of like diploma or something that's shown a little bit of kind of the merging of that would be beneficial for the sake of convincing somebody to have a proper look at your CV, have a proper look at your portfolio. But otherwise you're going to have to compensate with proof that you can merge those things. I wouldn't say get a full degree. I don't think that's necessary, but I think proving that you can merge them in some way. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I'd agree 100%. I think actually the majority of designers that we work with, we don't have design. I think any background is welcome. Like in design, I think it's always it'll always play to your strengths actually to have a different viewpoint. But having said that, I do think as Sophia said, like something like a diploma that might aid you in your own whenever you conduct the work yourself. If you have a bit more knowledge and understanding of it, it'll only accelerate you more in your career. I think it'll always be useful. But I wouldn't say it's essential to go back and do a degree or anything at all. No.
Yeah, like I know I mentioned there about in relation to age, but as well in our courses, many of our students are coming from a graphic design background, and for them the 6-month diploma is the perfect kind of time frame to be able to just fine tune their skills to make them more suited towards UX. Okay, so we have just a minute or two left, guys, and thank you so much for your time so far. It's been really useful and interesting. I guess to finish up, I'd love to just know from both of you what you enjoy most about working for IBM and in UX and in your roles right now, just for anybody who's looking for, to understand that this is a career that, can bring them joy and I guess, fulfillment and all those good feelings.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things for me, and I think within UX design and within design in general, I think the excitement, and especially within the space that Sophia and I work in, the excitement of innovation and kind of continuous evolvement of solutions, it's really exciting space to work in at the moment. And I suppose being able to add value to users at the end of the day, I think is actually really rewarding. Within IBM specifically, we have the opportunity to do loads of training and upskilling in ourselves, like as designers. It's really, really useful, and it's such a good resource to be able to have. So I think that's really valuable. But in general, yeah, I think the concept of it being so innovative, especially at the moment, and being able to contribute value back to users is really important.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. I had my eye on IBM pretty early on while I was doing my degree, because I was doing it in design thinking, and IBM was one of the first companies that kind of became design enterprise thinking centered, along with, I think, IDEO. And so finding a company that really aligned with something that I'd found that was a massive passion of mine, that really was something that got me up in the morning, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. That was a really big part of it for me. So I think just the idea of it, knowing that it is something that focuses on innovation, focuses on design thinking and center, that was kind of the biggest appeal for me. So I guess if any advice at all, just when you're looking for something, if you have the privilege to kind of choose, find something that aligns with what is a drive for you. And I think that's a huge part of design in general. Being able to connect with that in that way I think is really important.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you both so much again. It's been great to speak to you both this evening. And yeah, just before I end the session, I'm just going to share once more the information in case anybody is interested in our AI and UX workshop. Just given there were so many questions around how to use AI in the process, and this workshop will go right from research to prototyping to user testing. So I'll share those details again now on the screen. But to our guest speakers, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your sunny evening.
Thank you for having us. Yes.